Our goal here, like I said before, is if possible, we're going to try to recruit one of these two ninjas. However, that's going to be very, very... I'm not going to say it's going to be difficult. It's going to be more difficult because I'm running 4 guest characters. And at any given time, any one of those guest characters can choose to knock out or eliminate one of the characters one of the enemy units I'm trying to recruit. So, whereas I control, you know, the other, 10 characters, there's 4 on the board that I don't. That, like I said, at any given time can decide to target down with magic. Obviously, the one knight, he has to walk over and hit them, but you know, 3 of the 4 characters can use some variation of a range or magic spell. Got an actual mage. I've got Kashua, who knows a missile type spell, and then Christina can do, I believe she has access to magic. Maybe she just has healing magic, I don't know, but if she has any sort of access to bolt magic like that, then yeah, I'm gonna be a little bit at their mercy as to whether or not I'm gonna be able to recruit these characters or not. So since we're in the middle of Lent now, quote unquote the middle of Lent, it just started a few days ago. I know a lot of people, you know, they don't do the Catholic thing, which is, you know, fast. And well, I mean, fasting is, we're not going to talk about fasting for a second because I do it twice a year, on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. But the other thing we try to do is we try to do, well, I guess it kind of, I'm not sure if it falls under fasting or not, but basically you give something up for Lent, you know, as a sort of like a penance thing, you know. I like to eat chocolate. That's the one you always hear. I like to eat chocolate. I'm gonna give up chocolate for Lent. You're a real chocoholic, then go for it. That's a great thing to give up for Lent. But chocolate's for me, chocolate's way too easy to give up. You know, I like to challenge myself during Lent usually. However, a few years ago, a priest was talking about Lent, and he was talking about Lent's not just about giving stuff up. It's also about doing more, or focusing down on things that you're not currently doing in your relationship with God. And one of the things that really caught my attention when he said that was, I'd never read the Bible, like all the way through, that is. I'd read sections of the Bible. If I'm being honest, I believe, I could be mistaken, I may have skipped a couple, but I believe I'd read all of the New Testament. And I pause only because when you get past Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you get into the Acts of the Apostles, followed by the letters, and then at the end of all the letters is Revelation, which, you know, I've read Revelation, obviously, for one reason or another, we'll say. I mean, some of it's for, I had to know because people always talk about the end of the world, and this is a sign of the apocalypse, and that's a sign of the apocalypse, and blah, 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 this, and blah, 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 that, and I had to know what was in it. So I'd read prior to you know, actually reading all the way through the New Testament and then the Bible. the whole Bible itself. But that was one of those things that I hadn't done yet. I had read parts of, you know, I mean, obviously you hear the gospel at church, and you hear the same stories over and over again, mainly New Testament stories with Jesus, some Old Testament things that are important, like, you know, the very big one is always going to be the story of Abraham and him, you know, not being blessed with children, and then when he's finally blessed with a son, you know, God asked him to sacrifice his son. And so, you know, while the story doesn't exactly say this, it's mentioned later in the New Testament that the theory is that Abraham had such faith in the Lord that he believed that even he would be able to bring his son back to life. You know what I mean? That even death was not beyond God's reach, beyond God's power, which of course is important for Christianity's, you know, the way things play out in the New Testament and, you know, that sort of stuff. But that's the big one. That's the big one that sort of ties all the major Judeo-Christian religions together, is this. And there's other things that, because Christianity follows in the Jewish tradition, it you know, in a way, it acts sort of like a, I don't know what the right phrase to use without definitely pissing off somebody or some group of people, but it is a continuation of, in my mind, it's a continuation of Judaism, where, you know, we believe that the Messiah has come, and in the end he will come again at the end of time, which is kind of what I believe the Jews also believe, is they're waiting for a Messiah to come and save us, or bring the world to peace, you know. And that in Christianity, that person is Jesus. In their eyes, it's some future person that's going to come, you know. But, like, and I'm not 100% sure of all the different, you know, texts that the Jewish people follow. Okay. You know, the Bible follows, you know, it follows the first 5 books of the Bible, which are super important for Judaism. Okay. And then after that, I'm sure they've got other books. I don't really know if they have, you know, Judges and Kings and Psalms, and, you know, all of those books are included, or if they mainly focus down on the first 5 books of the Bible, you know. And I'm comparing, I should probably read up on this instead of just talking into a microphone about it. But in Christianity, in at least the Catholic faith, what we do for our readings is we have 3 readings. We have a reading that is usually from the Old Testament. Second reading is usually a letter by Paul to a group of the early Christians, and then the gospel reading comes right out of, you know, the 4 major books: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And what the Catholic Church does is we cycle through Matthew, Mark, and Luke in a 3-year cycle. So, you know, just for the sake of the way the Bible's written, first book you run into is Matthew. So I believe we consider Matthew to be the first in that 3-year cycle. So we focus on Matthew the first year, Luke the second year, or I'm sorry, Mark the second year and Luke the third year, and then we cycle back, and we sprinkle John in between, throughout the year, because his writings is fundamental. I'm not a theologist, but his writing is key to the heart of Christianity in my book. And what he says, he does in a more poetic version than Matthew, Mark, and Luke do. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are looking to tell you the facts of what happened to a certain group of people. Matthew to the Jews. Mark, I believe, was to the Greeks. And I know Matthew, something like I get these confused. Matthew was was written for the Jews. There's a lot of this is this was what was foretold by your prophets. Here is all the evidence to that. Here's reference back to it. This is the prophecy made man. And then I believe Luke was written to the Greeks, because they're sort of there's a more specific way of explaining this, but they are looking for the philosophical and spiritual nature of Christ in one. And Mark was written primarily for the Romans, which wanted to know the facts. They wanted to just know what the facts are. What are the facts? Tell me exactly, in the most succinct way, what happened, why did it happen, why is this important, And like I said, John was written sort of he writes the story, but he does it in a poetic manner, which, like I said, I believe is very important to the way the Bible's written, and the Christian story for that matter, because in his book he has the most memorable and quotable things that generally come out of the Bible. The obvious one that many people reference is John 3:16, which is God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son to be born of man, and to live. I'm starting to misquote, but he allowed his Son to become manifest as human, despite being God. And there are other things that are mentioned in John that I don't believe are in the other three, which includes it's the wedding. I don't remember. There's a more specific term. It's the wedding. It's something. And it's where Jesus performs his first miracle, and John records it. It's very interesting. I don't know. But getting back to my original point of what I was trying to say is that, Lent for us is not just about, well, the thing they always say is fasting, almsgiving, and prayer. Those are the three tent poles or staples of Lent for Catholics. Fasting, almsgiving, and prayer. And a lot of times, Catholics in particular, maybe I misrepresent the group as a whole, but you hear the people talk about, well, what are you giving up for Lent? What are you giving up for Lent? What are you giving up for Lent? And that's fine. Fasting, giving up something, eating more temperately is important, but the other two are also important. I don't know how much we as Catholics focus on the almsgiving portion, for instance, you know, or the prayer portion. You know, did your life become more prayerful during Lent? You know, because it is sort of the education or it is the lead up in Jesus's ministry that goes from the time when he begins his ministry until he dies and rises again on the from the grave. And then of course the stuff that happens after that, after he rises, that's Easter. And that's also important to the church, but at that point you're not fasting anymore. You're not in this state of woeful whatever you would call it. Well, I might call it woeful prayer. It's not really woeful prayer. It's you know what, because of the story, and you know what's coming, and you don't, in a way, it's just at this point, it's a story we tell every year, but every Lent, you just kind of like, at least for me, you just always just, and again, I know how the story ends. The story doesn't change just because, but I always go, why? Why? I mean, I know why, but it's just like, it just seems so pointless, I mean, that he comes to teach and bring the good news to the world. But his secondary purpose is he's also going to die for our sins as our sacrifice to wipe out our sins in the face of the Lord. And it just, I don't know. For the longest time I had trouble with that. Is this, why do you have to go? And because that's the way it had to happen. It's part of it's part of faith. I say faith, unfortunately, but it's part of understanding or giving into God's plan. Things happen for a reason. Why? I don't know. You want to talk about it from a non-religious perspective, because things randomly happen. The weather changes, the temperature changes, things get old, trees fall down, they're not as healthy as they used to be, and you happen to be walking in the woods one day when that tree decides to snap one of its major branches or something, and in a way it's just bad timing, bad luck, whatever you want to call it. But in a more religious aspect, they say everything happens for a reason. Everybody's got a purpose in this life, that your job is to try to, one, figure that out, and to do it to the best of your ability. I don't necessarily, this is a belief thing, I don't necessarily believe that everybody's brought to this earth for a single purpose. One singular purpose. You're born, I'll give you an example. You're born for no other reason than to one day wake up and press a button to open a door. But rather, we all play intermingling parts in each other's story. I affect you, and you affect others, and others affect others. And that may come back to me personally at some point, or it may never come back to me. Or what I'm telling you now may, at some point down the line, some unknowable way, affect my children. or my wife, or my parents, or their children, or their children's children. Because again, we're all part of the larger plan. And there's, like I said, not a singular reason that we're here, but our effects on this world last far longer than we can see. And whether you want to believe that that's part of some grand design or it's all luck, you have to always remember that what you do today affects others around you, and those other people will also affect other people. And by a long string of this happened, so this happened, so this happened, cause and effect, you may bring about the joy or the destruction of the people you love the most by your inadvertent actions today.
30,000 goth. So small a sum to save my...
Yeah, so he needed the bounty money to save his daughter's life. So, but you don't know that. Anyways, we're going to cut the episode here, and when we come back, we're going to continue our progress to, I believe it's called the Atlas Ride. I'm not 100% sure. I kind of forgot since I've been talking for so long. But until next time, I hope you guys all have a good one.